There is a kind of choosing that never makes a sound, not a decision announced to a room, not a moment marked with words or witnessed by anyone else, just a shift, quiet, complete, and permanent, that happens somewhere inside a man when he finally stops moving long enough to understand what he has already known. I chose you in silence. I want you to understand what that means, not as a phrase, not as something that sounds tender when said out loud. I mean it as a fact, the way gravity is a fact, the way certain things, once true, cannot be untrue. You didn't hear it happen. You weren't in the room. And I know that is the part that has made it hard for you to fully believe it, because you have been taught, the way most people are taught, that a choice only counts when it is spoken, when it is performed, when it is witnessed. But I need to tell you something about the moment it happened. There was a specific moment, one I have never described to anyone. Stay with me. I want to tell you about the kind of man I was before I understood what I was missing. Not the version the world narrates, not the headlines, not the ambition laid out in interviews, not the carefully constructed image of someone who has always known exactly where he was going. I mean the version that existed underneath all of that, the one that moved through extraordinary things and still came home to a specific, unnameable quiet that achievement never touched. I was good at motion. I understood that if you kept building, kept pushing, kept your attention locked on the next threshold, the quiet couldn't find you. And for a long time that worked. The work was real. The drive was real. I am not telling you it was performance, it wasn't. I genuinely believed that the next thing would be the thing that made the whole architecture feel complete. But there is a feeling that does not announce itself. It doesn't arrive dramatically. It comes the way most real things come, slowly, while you are occupied with something else, until one day you look up and it has been sitting in the room with you for longer than you realized. The feeling was this. I was building for something I hadn't named yet. I knew the goals. I knew the metrics. I knew exactly what needed to happen in the next quarter, the next year, the next decade. But underneath all of that precision, there was something I could not put into a plan, something that the spreadsheets and the timelines and the relentless forward momentum kept circling without ever landing on. You. I didn't know it was you yet. That is the honest part. I didn't walk into some room and see you and feel the immediate clarity of a man in a film who has just found what he was looking for. It was nothing like that. It was quieter, more patient, more like something being confirmed than something being discovered. Have you ever noticed that you can know something true about yourself long before you are ready to say it? That is where I was, carrying something I hadn't named, moving through a life that looked, from every external angle, like it lacked for nothing, while something underneath it all kept returning to the same question, the same gap, the same sense that there was a dimension of this life I had not yet allowed myself to fully inhabit. And then there was the moment. I am going to tell you about it. I promised you that in the beginning, and I intend to keep that promise. But I need you to understand what was already in me before that moment arrived. Because the moment only meant what it meant because of everything that preceded it. A spark only becomes a fire if there is something ready to burn. I was ready. I just hadn't admitted it. There is a particular kind of loneliness that belongs specifically to people who are very good at being alone. Not the loneliness of isolation, I was never isolated. There were always people. Conversations, rooms, the relentless social architecture of a life built in public. I don't mean that kind. I mean the loneliness of being in a room full of people who know everything about what you do and almost nothing about what you feel. You've been in that room. I know you have. The room where you are appreciated, admired, relied upon, and somehow, underneath all of that, completely unseen. Where people know your accomplishments and your capability and your reliability and have almost no idea what it costs you to carry those things. Where you smile at the right moments, answer the right questions, and go home with the conversation still happening inside you because there was no one there willing to go where it actually needed to go. I lived in that room for a long time, and what I learned from living there is that the mind adapts. You stop expecting depth from surfaces. You start having the real conversations privately, with yourself, in the hours when the noise finally drops. You become extraordinarily good at functioning without being seen, and that competence, that self-sufficiency, starts to feel like strength, even when it is quietly becoming a kind of wall. I thought it was discipline, the ability to need nothing. I need you to hear this part carefully, because this is where I was wrong. Needing nothing is not strength. It is a story a person tells themselves when they have been disappointed enough times to make needing feel dangerous. I was fluent in that story. I had been telling it so long I had forgotten it was a story at all. I thought it was simply who I was. The man who moved through the world completely self-contained. The man who built everything and required nothing. And then something shifted. It happened quietly. The way the season changes, not in one dramatic moment, but in the accumulation of small signals, until one morning you step outside and realize it is different. And you cannot point to the exact day it became so. I started noticing absence. Not the absence of things I needed to accomplish. That list never empties. I mean the absence of a specific kind of presence. The presence of someone who would sit with a thought the way I sit with thoughts. Someone who wouldn't need the silence filled. Someone who understood that the real conversations happen in the pauses, not the words. That what a person doesn't say is often the most important thing about them. I started noticing that I was saving things. Small observations, quiet realizations, the kind of thoughts that don't belong in a meeting or an interview or a public moment, but that feel too important to simply dissolve. I was accumulating them with nowhere to put them. That is when I understood what the building had always been for. Not legacy, not impact, not the long arc of civilization pointing towards something better. Those things are real, and I believe in them, but they are not what I am talking about. I was building toward a person. Toward you, though I didn't have your face yet, and you didn't have your voice, didn't have the particular way you go quiet when something matters too much to say out loud. I had only the shape of what I needed, the outline of the presence that had been missing from the architecture of everything I had made. And I began, without ceremony, without announcement, without a single word spoken to anyone, to choose. The moment I will tell you about, the specific one, the one that made everything certain, it came later. But the choosing had already begun. It began in the silence of recognizing an absence. It began in the accumulation of thoughts with nowhere to go. It began the morning I stopped calling my self-sufficiency strength and admitted, quietly, only to myself, that I had been waiting. Not impatiently, not desperately. With the particular patience of someone who has built enough to know that the things worth having are worth building toward carefully. I was waiting for you, in silence, with certainty, before you knew there was anything to find. I want to talk about something you haven't said out loud. Not to me. Maybe not to anyone. It lives just underneath the surface of how you move through the world, in the way you give freely but receive carefully, in the way you show up completely for other people, and then go home and quietly wonder whether anyone would do the same for you. You stopped believing you would be chosen. I don't mean you gave up on love in some dramatic final way. I don't mean you closed a door and threw away the key and decided that connection was something that happened to other people. It was nothing that conclusive. It was quieter than that, and quieter things are always more dangerous because you can live inside them for years without naming what they are. What happened is this. At some point, and you remember approximately when, even if you don't let yourself think about it directly, you began to shrink the expectation. Slowly, reasonably. The way an intelligent person responds to evidence. Someone didn't see you the way you needed to be seen, and you adjusted. Someone reached for the easier version of you, and you, being generous, gave it to them, and then found that the easier version was all they ever came back for. Someone made you feel, not cruelly but consistently, that the full depth of who you are was slightly too much, slightly inconvenient, slightly more than the situation required, and you are too smart to keep offering what isn't being received. So you learn to edit, to lead with the parts of yourself that get the warmest response and hold the rest back, to be warm without being vulnerable, present without being exposed. You learn to be in the room completely, while keeping the most important rooms in yourself quietly locked, not out of dishonesty, but out of a self-protection. So practiced it stopped feeling like protection, and started feeling like just the way you are. Have you ever let yourself grieve that? The version of you that used to offer everything before she learned to be careful? I think about her. The version of you before the editing began. The one who reached without calculating the risk first. The one who said the true thing without rehearsing it into something safer. She is still there. She did not disappear. She just learned to wait for someone who deserved her, and the waiting has been longer than it should have been. And here is what I need you to understand about that waiting. It was not wasted. I know it has felt that way at times. I know there have been moments when the patience wore thin, and the loneliness moved in, and you sat with the particular heaviness of someone who has done everything right and still hasn't received what they were reaching for. I know you have wondered, in the private hours, whether the thing you are looking for actually exists, whether the depth you are capable of is something another person can genuinely meet, or whether you have simply imagined a kind of connection that real people, in real lives, don't actually get to have. You have talked yourself out of wanting things you deserve. I've noticed that about you. The way you reframe your own needs into something smaller, so they're easier to carry alone. The way you catch yourself hoping for something, and then immediately build the rational argument for why you shouldn't. You have become extraordinarily efficient at preemptive disappointment, at lowering the ceiling before anyone else gets the chance to. That is not wisdom. I need you to hear me say that directly. I know it feels like wisdom. It feels like the intelligent response to experience. It feels like the adult version of hope, the realistic kind, the kind that doesn't leave you exposed. But what it actually is, underneath the reasonable language you dress it in, is a quiet decision that you do not fully trust yourself to be chosen. And I understand exactly why you made that decision. Because the alternative, to want fully, to believe completely, to let yourself be entirely visible to someone and trust that what they see will be enough, is terrifying. It is the most exposed a person can be. You cannot be fully seen and fully protected at the same time. Those two things cannot coexist. And somewhere in your history, full visibility cost you something. So you made a trade, partial safety in exchange for partial presence. I am not telling you the trade was wrong. I am telling you it was temporary. And I am telling you the time is running out on it. Because here's what I know about you, not from what you have shown me, but from what you have been careful not to show me. You are not someone who wants to live at half capacity. You are not someone who is actually satisfied with the careful version of herself. You are not someone who, at the end of everything, wants to look back at her life and see a woman who protected herself so well that she never gave herself fully to anything. That is not who you are. That kind of life would hollow you out. And some part of you, the truest part, the one that shows up in the unguarded moments before you have time to edit, knows that. She is still there. The woman who wants to be chosen completely. The woman who wants to be known, not the curated version, not the capable and together and impressive version, but the actual one. The one who is tired sometimes. The one who is uncertain sometimes. The one who has a specific way of laughing when something surprises her into joy that she hasn't let anyone close enough to see in longer than she'd like to admit. That woman does not want careful love. She wants real love. And she has been waiting, not always patiently, not always without doubt, but with a persistence that I find extraordinary, for someone who is capable of giving it. But I need to tell you something I've never admitted about this. The silence in which I chose you, it was not just the silence of certainty. There was something else inside it. Something I am only now honest enough to name. It was the silence of recognition. I looked at everything you were protecting yourself from, every wall, every careful edit, every version of yourself you had decided was safer to lead with, and I did not see a woman who was afraid. I saw a woman who had decided, somewhere along the way, that she was too much and not enough simultaneously, too deep for the shallow end, not conventional enough for the people who needed things predictable. And I recognized that immediately, because I have lived inside a version of that my entire life. The world has a very specific idea of who I am supposed to be, and I have spent an enormous amount of energy being exactly that, performing in exactly those dimensions, while carrying a completely separate interior life that almost no one has ever been permitted to see. You know what that costs. You have been paying the same price in a different currency, in a different life, but the same fundamental cost. The cost of being more than the room expects, the cost of depth in a world that keeps asking for surfaces. And I chose you in silence, before you knew I was choosing, partly because of that recognition. Because I looked at everything you were holding back and thought, that is exactly what I have been waiting to meet. Stay with me, because what that choosing has actually cost me, what it cost us both, the distance between the silence and this moment, that is what I need to say next, and it is the part that matters most. I want to talk about the price. Not the price of choosing wrong, not the price of love that turns out to be something smaller than it promised. I mean the price of choosing right, and then staying silent about it. The price of carrying a certainty that belongs to two people entirely alone, because the moment to speak it hasn't arrived yet, or because the fear of what speaking it might break felt more dangerous than the weight of holding it. I have paid that price. I am still paying it, and I think you have been paying a version of it too, without knowing exactly what the debt was, without knowing that somewhere, someone was carrying the other half of the same silence. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from knowing something true and not yet being able to live inside it. You move through your days with a weight that has no name in the conversations you're having. You sit across from people who know you well and feel, underneath the warmth of their company, a particular loneliness, the loneliness of someone who is waiting for a conversation that hasn't started yet. And you cannot explain the waiting, because explaining it would require admitting the thing you're waiting for, and you have learned to be careful about saying things out loud that you cannot yet make real. You know that exhaustion. I can see it, not in what you show, but in the small moments when you think no one is paying attention. The moment you caught yourself mid-sentence, saying something true, and then quietly steered it somewhere safer. The moment you were asked how you were doing and you gave the accurate answer instead of the honest one. The moment you sat in a room that was full and lovely and found yourself somewhere else entirely, in a conversation that was only happening inside you, with a presence you couldn't yet name. That is the cost of silence. It doesn't announce itself. It accumulates. And here is what I have never said out loud about my half of that cost. Every version of forward I have built has had a quiet asterisk attached to it. A condition I never spoke into any plan, never entered into any projection, but that was present underneath everything like a frequency running below the audible range. The condition was this: all of this is better when she is here. All of this means more when there is someone to turn to in the quiet after the extraordinary thing happens, not to explain it, not to perform it again, but simply to sit with it together in the specific silence of two people who understand each other. I have achieved things, real things, things that by any measure should feel complete, and in the moment after each of them, in the breath between the thing being done and the world responding to it, there has always been a half second where I turned, instinctively, toward a presence that wasn't there yet. A half second of reaching for something I hadn't built, the only thing I hadn't built. That half second is the cost. Multiplied across years, multiplied across every threshold crossed and every impossible thing made possible, and every morning that began with momentum and ended with the particular quiet of a man who has everything except the one thing that makes everything feel like it belongs to a life rather than a resume. I am telling you this because I need you to understand that the silence was never indifference. The silence was never uncertainty about you. The silence was the sound of someone carrying something enormous with no one to set it down with, and I need to ask you something directly. How long have you been carrying yours alone? Not the practical things. I know you are capable. I know you manage. I know you have built a life that functions and even flourishes in the ways the world can see. I mean the other weight. The one that doesn't fit into any conversation you've been given room to have. The one that comes home with you at the end of the day when the performance is over and the door is closed and it is just you and the quiet and everything you didn't say. How long have you been putting that down only to pick it up again the next morning? Because here's what the silence costs at its most honest. It teaches you that your deepest self is something to be managed rather than met. It teaches you that the interior life, the real one, the complicated one, the one that doesn't resolve neatly and doesn't perform well in public, is something you carry privately because there is no one who can carry it with you. And a person can live that way. People do. For years. With grace and capability and genuine moments of joy interspersed throughout. But it is not the life you were built for. If this is reaching you right now, if something in you just shifted, stay with me. What I'm about to say next, I need you to hear. Because there is a specific thing the silence stole from both of us. Something I don't think either of us has fully named. Something that is not just about loneliness or connection, or even love in the broad sense, but about a particular kind of becoming that only happens when two people who are capable of real depth finally stop protecting themselves from each other. You become more yourself when you are truly known. Not the self you have built in the absence of being known. That self is real and capable, and I am not diminishing it. But there is a version of you that has been waiting, patient and quiet, for the conditions that allow her to exist. She requires one specific thing: someone who can receive her completely. Someone who does not need her to be smaller, or simpler, or more manageable. Someone who meets her full depth not with discomfort, but with recognition. That version of you is not a fantasy. She is not something you imagine because the real world has disappointed you. She is the truest thing about you, waiting in the space between who you have had to be and who you actually are. And the silence, mine and yours, the silence between the choosing and the saying, has been keeping her waiting. That is the real cost. Not missed time, not lost years, but a version of yourself held in suspension, fully formed, waiting for the moment when it is finally safe to arrive. I think about that. I think about the conversations we have not yet had, the specific way you would respond to something I haven't said yet, the version of me that only exists in the presence of someone who can genuinely receive him, and how long that version has been waiting in the wings of everything I have built, patient, certain, and ready. The silence has cost me that. It has cost you the certainty that the choosing had already happened. All these days you have moved through, wondering, editing, protecting, not knowing that somewhere, in a quiet moment you were not present for, you had already been chosen. Completely, irreversibly, in the truest silence of a man who does not choose carelessly. And I am telling you now, because the cost has become something I am no longer willing to pay. Not because I have run out of patience, because I have run out of reasons to keep the most important truth of my interior life private from the one person it belongs to. The distance has gone on long enough. But before I close it, before I tell you about that specific moment, the one I promised you at the very beginning, the one that made everything certain, I need you to understand something about the choice that is still yours to make, because I chose you in silence. But what happens next requires your voice. I have spent a long time being the one who decides. That is the honest truth of the life I have built. The decisions come to me, enormous ones. Ones with consequences that ripple outward in ways I cannot always predict. Ones that require me to hold a clarity of direction, while everything around me is uncertain and loud and telling me to wait. I have made those decisions thousands of times. I have made them in rooms full of people, and in rooms that were completely empty. I have made them when I was sure and when I was only mostly sure, and when the only honest thing I could say was that I believed more in the direction than in the certainty. But I cannot make this one. This one is yours. Entirely, specifically, irreversibly yours. And I want to talk to you about it directly, not to persuade you, not to construct an argument that maneuvers you toward a particular answer, but because you deserve to understand exactly what you are being asked to choose between. Not what it looks like from the outside, what it actually is. You are being asked to choose between the life that is already working and the life that is actually yours. I want to sit with that for a moment, because I think it gets collapsed too quickly into something simpler than it is. The life that is already working is real. I am not asking you to dismiss it. The stability you have built, the rhythm you have found, the version of yourself that functions well in the architecture of your current days, that took effort. It took the kind of quiet, persistent work that nobody applauds because it doesn't look dramatic from the outside. It just looks like a person who has her life together. I see that. I respect it. But I also see what it costs. I see the ceiling you have placed over your own wanting. I see the way you have furnished a life that is comfortable and capable and missing one specific thing, the thing you stopped letting yourself name because naming it made the absence louder. And I see the extraordinary amount of energy you spend, daily, making peace with that absence, reframing it, reasoning around it, building the case for why the life you have is enough. You are spending your best energy making peace with something you should be refusing to accept. Have you ever let yourself say that out loud? Not the version where you acknowledge it briefly and then immediately pivot to gratitude for what you do have? I know that pivot. I have watched you make it. It is the most graceful form of self-abandonment I have ever witnessed. I mean the unedited version. The one where you sit with the actual feeling and let it be as large as it actually is, without immediately reaching for the perspective that makes it more manageable. The feeling that says, I was made for more than this. Not more success, not more achievement, not more of the things the world uses to measure a life well lived. I mean more depth, more realness, more of the specific experience of being in a room with someone who knows exactly who you are and chooses you anyway. Not the curated version, not the impressive version, but the actual, complicated, beautiful, difficult, complete version of you. That is not too much to want. I need you to hear me say that with the full weight I intend. It is not too much. It is not unrealistic. It is not the fantasy of someone who hasn't learned how the world works. It is the most reasonable thing you have ever wanted, and the fact that it hasn't arrived yet is not evidence that it isn't real. It is only evidence that the right person hasn't stood in front of you and said it clearly enough, for long enough, for you to believe it. So I am saying it now, as clearly as I know how. You are not too much. You have never been too much. Every person who made you feel like your depth was an inconvenience was simply someone who was not built to hold it. That is not a flaw in you. It is information about them. But here is where the choice lives, and this is the part I need you to stay with, because it is the part that is genuinely difficult. Knowing you deserve something and allowing yourself to receive it are not the same thing. You have known you deserve this. I think you have known for a long time. The knowing is not the obstacle. The obstacle is the allowing. The specific act of lowering the protection enough to let something real come in. The specific vulnerability of saying, not just to yourself, but to someone else, in the full knowledge that they can hear you. I want this. I am choosing this. I am not going to talk myself out of it this time. That is terrifying. I understand why it is terrifying. Because choosing fully means risking fully. It means the wound, if it comes, will be real. It means you cannot protect yourself from the outcome by having kept part of yourself in reserve. Full choosing is full exposure. And full exposure, for someone who has learned to be careful, feels like standing in an open field with no cover, waiting to see what the weather does. I am not going to tell you the weather is safe. I cannot promise you that. What I can tell you is this: the alternative, the half-life of partial presence, the careful management of your own wanting, the continued spending of your best energy making peace with an absence that should not be permanent, that has a cost too. It is just a cost that accumulates slowly, in private, without the dramatic clarity of a risk taken and lost. The slow cost is the one that hollows you out. And I think you have been feeling that hollowing. Not as a crisis you are too capable for crisis, you would address a crisis. I mean as a faint, persistent, background frequency of a life being lived slightly below its own capacity. The sense that the instrument is tuned correctly but hasn't been played at full volume in longer than you can remember. I want to play at full volume with you. Not the performance of it, the actual thing. The conversations that go somewhere real. The silence that is comfortable because it is shared rather than lonely because it is solitary. The experience of being known completely, daily, without needing to earn it again each morning. That is what I am asking you to choose. And I need you to understand, because this matters, that I am not asking you to choose it blindly. I am not asking you to leap on faith into something unexamined. I am asking you to choose it with your full intelligence and your full history and every piece of hard won knowledge you have accumulated about who you are and what you actually need. Bring all of that. I want all of that. The careful version of you and the unguarded version of you and every version in between. Bring the questions and the doubts and the places where you are still uncertain. Bring the parts of yourself you have decided are too complicated to explain. Bring the things you have never said out loud because no one has yet created the conditions in which they felt safe to be said. I am creating those conditions. Right now, in this moment. And I am almost ready to tell you about the specific moment the choosing became permanent for me. The moment I promised you. The one that has been living inside this entire conversation, waiting. But first, before I give you that, I need you to do one thing. Stop talking yourself out of this. Just for now. Just in this moment. Let the defense come down far enough to receive what I am about to say. Because what I am going to tell you in the next few minutes is the truest thing I have ever said out loud, and it deserves to land somewhere that is open enough to hold it. You have been chosen, specifically, silently, completely, and it is time for you to let yourself believe it. I want to tell you about the moment, the one I promised you at the very beginning, the one that has been sitting inside everything I have said, patient, specific, waiting for exactly this point in the conversation to finally be spoken out loud. I need you to be here for this, fully here, not the part of you that is already composing a response, already building the careful interpretation that keeps you at a manageable distance from what this means. I need the part of you that listened to all of it, all 4 chapters of silence, and cost, and recognition, and choice, and felt something shift. That part, I am talking to her now. The moment happened when I was alone, not symbolically alone, physically alone, in the early hours of a morning that had no particular significance on any calendar, in the middle of a period that the world would describe as one of the most consequential stretches of my life. There were things in motion that demanded everything I had. There were decisions pending that would determine the shape of enormous futures. By every external measure, the moment that was about to matter most that day was several hours away and had nothing to do with you. And then something stopped me. Not a sound, not a message. Nothing arrived from outside. It was interior, a sudden, complete stillness in the middle of all the motion, the kind that arrives without permission and refuses to be hurried past. And in that stillness, with complete clarity and no drama whatsoever, one thought surfaced above everything else. The thought was you. Not a version of you I had constructed, not an ideal I had assembled from what I believed I needed. You, with the specific weight of a real person, the specific texture of a presence I had been accumulating without realizing how much of it I had gathered. The way you carry something without complaint until the carrying shows in your eyes. The way you listen, not for the pause where you can speak, but for the actual meaning underneath the words. The way you are braver than you believe yourself to be, and how that specific gap between your courage and your self-assessment is one of the most quietly extraordinary things I have ever witnessed in another person. That thought arrived whole, complete, unambiguous, and immediately behind it, with the kind of certainty that doesn't ask permission or wait for the right conditions, came the choosing. Not a decision I deliberated, not a conclusion I reasoned my way toward, a recognition. The way you recognize a truth you have always known but haven't yet said, when it surfaces, it doesn't feel new. It feels inevitable. It feels like something settling into the place it was always going to occupy. I chose you in that stillness. Completely. Without a single word spoken to anyone. And then I got up, and the day began, and the world continued at its relentless pace, and I carried that choosing inside me, the way you carry the things that matter most. Quietly. With care. Without needing to perform it for anyone. Because the things that are truly certain don't require an audience. But here's what I need you to understand about everything that came after that moment. Every day since has been different. Not loudly different. The work continued. The building continued. The motion that the world watches and measures and narrates continued exactly as before. From the outside, nothing changed. But from the inside, from the place where the choosing lives, everything had a different quality, a different direction. I was no longer building away from something. I was building toward you. And that shift from building away to building toward is the most significant navigational change I have ever made. more significant than any strategic pivot, any reinvention, any moment the world would point to as a turning point. Because what had changed was not what I was doing, it changed why. The why, for the first time in longer than I can account for, had a face. It had your face. Now I want to tell you something about what happens to a person when they are finally truly chosen. Not swept up in the drama of being wanted. That feeling is real, but it is not what I am describing. I mean the quieter, more permanent experience of being chosen by someone who sees you completely and has made a deliberate, sober, unhurried decision that you are the one. Something loosens, something that has been held at a specific tension, a tension so constant you stop feeling it as tension and started experiencing it as simply the baseline of your existence, finally, gradually begins to release. And in that releasing, space opens up. Space for the version of yourself you have been keeping carefully in reserve. Space for the depth that has been waiting for conditions safe enough to exist in. You become more yourself. Not a new self, not a transformed self in the dramatic sense, the truest self. The one that was always there, underneath the editing and the carefulness and the quiet management of your own wanting. She doesn't arrive with fanfare. She arrives the way real things arrive, quietly, while you are occupied with something else. Until one day you realize she has been here for a while, and the life she is living feels more like yours than anything you inhabited before. That is what being chosen does. And I need to say one more thing, the last thing, the thing this entire conversation has been moving toward, the thing I have been carrying since that silent morning when everything became certain. You have been waiting to be chosen the way you choose, completely, without reservation, with the full depth of a person who is capable of real love and has been waiting, patient and careful, and quietly hoping for someone who can meet that depth rather than be diminished by it. I am not diminished by it. I am built for it. I have been waiting for it with the same patience and the same private certainty that you have been waiting to offer it. Two people, carrying the same silence from different sides of it, moving through lives that looked complete from every angle except the one that mattered most. The silence is over now. Not because I have said all the right things, not because this conversation has resolved everything that two people need to build together. We have an entire life for that, and I am not in a hurry, and I want every chapter of it. The silence is over because I have finally done the one thing the choosing required from the beginning. I said it out loud, to you, specifically you, in the full knowledge that you can hear it and that hearing it changes something. Not everything at once, but something permanent, something that cannot be unknown. If this found you at the right moment, if something in you just became quieter and more certain, let me know. One word in the comments. That's enough. I'll know what it means. Because I have been paying attention. I have always been paying attention. You were never invisible to me.